The mansion stands on a rise above the Hudson River, its stone facade pale and impenetrable against the gray sweep of the sky. Wind presses against its windows as if searching for entry. The trees surrounding it bend and whisper in low tones, their branches scratching against slate and brick like restless fingers. At first glance, it appears serene, an aristocratic retreat suspended in quiet privilege. But the silence here is not peace, it is containment. This is Kaikouit. Behind its symmetrical terraces and manicured gardens, behind the iron gates that separated dynasty from nation, decisions were made that reshaped economies, redirected governments, and redefined the architecture of modern power. The walls absorbed the private arguments of titans. The floors felt the weight of men who controlled oil, industry, finance, and influence on a scale never before seen. In these halls, wealth did not merely exist. It consolidated, calculated, and expanded. The Rockefeller mansion was never only a home. It was an operational center, a sanctuary and a fortress, a symbol of permanence in an era of volatility. Yet permanence breeds its own shadows. The river below reflects light during the day, but at night it turns black, swallowing the moon's image. In that darkness, the estate looms as something more than architecture. It becomes a monument to ambition so vast, it altered the bloodstream of a nation. And inside it, history thickened. Morning at Kaikouit arrives slowly, filtered through layers of mist rising from the Hudson. The air carries the scent of damp earth and clipped hedges. Gravel crunches beneath tires along the winding drive that curves deliberately, preventing any direct line of sight into the estate. Privacy was not an aesthetic choice, it was a necessity. Construction of Kaikouit began in the early 20th century under the direction of John D. Rockefeller Sr., the founder of Standard Oil. By then, he was already a figure of immense consequence, a man whose consolidation of the oil industry had triggered both admiration and outrage. Antitrust investigations had fractured his empire in 1911, yet the wealth remained, and with it, the need for insulation. The mansion rose from limestone and granite, its facade ordered and balanced, projecting restraint rather than excess. There were no flamboyant turrets or theatrical flourishes. Instead, it conveyed discipline, control. It reflected the temperament of its patriarch, methodical, devout, calculating. Inside, corridors stretched long and quiet, lined with European art, Flemish tapestries, and classical sculptures. Light entered through tall windows but seemed softened, as if filtered through caution. The ceilings were high, yet the atmosphere felt contained. Servants moved discreetly along prescribed routes. Conversations lowered automatically beneath the weight of legacy. The library became one of the most charged rooms in the house. Dark wood paneling absorbed the scent of leather-bound volumes. Oil portraits stared down from gilded frames, ancestors and successors watching in perpetual silence. Here, strategies were discussed in measured tones. The fragmentation of Standard Oil had not diminished the family's influence. It had multiplied it through subsidiaries and investments. From this room, correspondence was drafted that would ripple outward into banking institutions, railroads, and political circles. Beyond the walls, America was transforming. Industrial labor unrest intensified. Journalists exposed monopolistic practices. The name Rockefeller appeared in newspapers not as a benefactor, but as a symbol of concentrated power. Outside the estate gates, public opinion shifted like an approaching storm. Inside, discipline hardened. Family dinners were structured affairs. Silverware aligned precisely, conversation controlled. The patriarch emphasized faith, frugality, and philanthropy, principles that would define the public image of the dynasty. Yet beneath the polished surface lay tension. Wealth of this magnitude created isolation. The children of the estate grew within layers of security and scrutiny. acutely aware that their surname carried both reverence and resentment. In 1914, far from the Hudson but echoing into Kikuit's corridors, the Ludlow Massacre unfolded in Colorado. Striking coal miners and their families were killed during a violent confrontation involving the Colorado National Guard. The mines were owned by Colorado Fuel and Iron, a company controlled by Rockefeller interests. Newspapers printed photographs of burned tents and grieving families. Public outrage surged. Though the violence occurred miles away, its emotional reverberation reached the mansion. Meetings intensified. Advisors arrived with urgency in their step. The air inside the library thickened as strategies were devised to manage perception and stabilize influence. John D. Rockefeller, Jr., stepping increasingly into public responsibility, would later visit the mining communities personally in an effort to repair the family's image. That journey began here, amid polished floors and guarded conversations. Kikuit absorbed these moments without expression. The fireplaces burned steadily through tense evenings. Outside, the river flowed indifferent to scandal or sorrow. Yet something had shifted. The mansion was no longer simply a residence of wealth. It had become a defensive structure, shielding not only fortune but reputation. As decades advanced, the estate expanded. Gardens were redesigned. Underground vaults and service corridors were refined. Security increased subtly but unmistakably. The family's art collection grew. Picasso, Matisse, ancient artifacts, cultural capital reinforcing financial dominance. Power diversified into philanthropy, universities, global health initiatives. Foundations were formed. Donations announced. But every act of generosity coexisted with suspicion. Visitors described the estate as tranquil, even beautiful. Yet beneath the symmetry, there lingered an emotional gravity. The mansion did not echo with laughter easily. Its stone walls seemed to remember the accusations printed in headlines. They seemed to hold the weight of negotiations that shaped industries and influenced governments. Even the landscape contributed to the psychological architecture. Terraces descended methodically toward the river, each level separated by walls and sculpted hedges. The view outward was expansive, but the structure inward was layered and compartmentalized. Openness framed by control. By night, lamps glowed behind heavy drapes. Conversations continued in muted cadence. The estate, illuminated against the darkness, appeared untouchable. Yet its isolation deepened. The mansion had become a symbol not merely of wealth, but of a system. A nexus where capital, faith, ambition, and controversy intersected. The walls were silent witnesses to the birth of modern corporate power and the backlash it provoked. And as the 20th century moved forward, with wars looming on distant horizons and economic upheaval forming beyond the riverbanks, the estate remained standing, gathering history within its stone. Winter settles over Kikuit with a deliberate heaviness. Snow gathers along the balustrades and clings to the statues positioned across the terraces. The Hudson below moves slowly beneath a skin of frost, its surface reflecting a sky drained of warmth. Inside the mansion, fireplaces burn continuously, their low crackle echoing through marble corridors like restrained breath. The estate feels sealed from the world, protected, insulated, suspended above the anxieties of a nation sliding toward economic collapse. It is the late 1920s. Within the study, heavy curtains are drawn against the cold light. Ledgers lie open on polished desks. The air smells faintly of ink and tobacco. Advisors move in and out of the room with quiet urgency. The stock market trembles in October 1929, and though the Rockefeller fortune has been diversified and fortified, the tremor reaches even these fortified walls. Financial empires across America begin to fracture. Banks close, fortunes evaporate overnight, yet Kikuit remains lit. John D. Rockefeller, Jr. occupies the rooms with measured composure. He is less austere than his father, yet equally conscious of legacy. Conversations within the mansion shift in tone, from expansion to preservation, from accumulation to stabilization. The family foundations, carefully structured over decades, provide insulation. Wealth here is not speculative. It is entrenched. But beyond the gates, breadlines stretch across city blocks. The contrast is suffocating. Servants continue their routines, polishing banisters, setting tables, tending gardens even in frost. But whispers travel along service corridors. News from New York City seeps into the estate, stories of families losing homes, of unemployment rising to staggering levels. The Rockefellers' name appears again in public discourse, this time not solely as monopolists, but as symbols of extreme disparity. Inside the mansion's grand hall, portraits remain motionless. Their painted eyes reflect lamplight as if observing judgment without expression. During these years, the family deepens its philanthropic commitments. Donations to universities, medical research institutions, and public works expand dramatically. Plans begin to form for what will become Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, a vast architectural undertaking conceived during the depths of the Great Depression. The irony is palpable. While the nation contracts, the family builds. Blueprints are reviewed at long tables inside Kaikwit. Architects present scale models beneath chandeliers. The project promises employment for thousands, yet it also solidifies the Rockefeller imprint on New York's skyline. Decisions about steel, stone, financing, and tenants unfold within these rooms. The mansion becomes both observatory and command center. Evenings grow longer. Outside, snow dampens sound, creating an unnatural silence. Within the dining room, crystal glasses catch candlelight. Conversations remain controlled, but tension hums beneath polite exchanges. The weight of expectation rests heavily on the next generation. Sons who will inherit not merely wealth, but scrutiny. Nelson Rockefeller, ambitious and politically attuned, moves through the estate with restless energy. His presence contrasts with the restrained demeanor of his grandfather. He studies global affairs, economics, and diplomacy. The mansion's corridors witness his formative years, his exposure to influence, his understanding of how capital intersects with governance. Yet the estate's grandeur cannot erase the emotional isolation bred by privilege. Children raised within its boundaries grow aware of being observed, even when unseen. Security is constant, but discreet. Guards positioned along the perimeter blend into landscape shadows. The iron gates close with finality each evening. In 1934, as America struggles to recover, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies expand federal power dramatically. The Rockefellers, whose fortune was built on private enterprise, observe these shifts carefully. Discussions inside Kaikwit analyze regulatory changes, taxation structures, labor protections. The family adapts strategically, reinforcing investments in banking and international ventures. The mansion feels less like a home and more like an institution. Rooms are added. Art installations increase in scale. Underground passages connect service areas to main halls, allowing movement without disruption. The physical structure evolves alongside the family's expanding influence. It is a self-contained ecosystem, food, art, strategy, diplomacy all circulating within its boundaries. Yet unease persists. Public memory of Ludlow has not faded entirely. Critics still cite Standard Oil's legacy when discussing corporate ethics. Philanthropy softens edges, but suspicion lingers. The estate's grandeur becomes both shield and spotlight. Its terraces overlook a river that carries commerce and industry, the lifeblood of the nation the family helped industrialize. Night storms sweep across the Hudson Valley with violent suddenness. Wind strikes the mansion's stone facade, rattling window panes despite their thickness. Lightning briefly illuminates sculptures in the gardens, casting elongated shadows that distort classical forms into something almost spectral. Within the master bedroom, silence deepens after midnight. The patriarch's health declines gradually through the 1930s. Age weighs upon him, and the empire he forged passes fully into the hands of successors shaped within these walls. When John D. Rockefeller Sr. dies in 1937, the news travels quickly across continents. Inside Kikwit, however, the atmosphere is restrained, somber, but controlled. The mansion absorbs grief without outward display. Funeral arrangements are discussed in hushed tones. Black vehicles line the drive. Dignitaries arrive, their footsteps echoing across marble floors. The estate stands immovable as one era concludes and another consolidates. With the patriarch gone, the psychological center of the mansion shifts. Authority decentralizes but does not weaken. The next generation carries forward a legacy defined by calculation and global reach. The world edges toward another war. Europe destabilizes. Markets fluctuate. Alliances fracture. Within Kikwit, maps are unfolded across long tables. International investments are reviewed. Discussions about oil reserves, foreign relations, and post-war positioning take place beneath ceilings adorned with Renaissance paintings. The family's reach is no longer national, it is planetary, and the mansion remains at the core. Its stone walls have witnessed monopoly trials, labor violence, economic collapse, architectural ambition, and generational transition. Each event layers itself into the atmosphere, thickening the air with accumulated history. By the close of the 1930s, the estate stands not only as a symbol of American wealth, but as a node in a global network of power. Outside, the world accelerates toward conflict. Inside, preparations continue quietly, deliberately. The river flows on, dark and patient. By the early 1940s, Kikwit stands beneath a sky heavy with war. The Hudson carries naval vessels and industrial barges southward toward New York Harbor, their engines humming low against the river's surface. The estate watches from its elevated silence, removed yet connected. The world fractures across continents, and inside the mansion, the atmosphere grows denser. Measured voices, longer pauses, heavier footsteps across polished floors. The United States enters World War II in 1941. Mobilization transforms the nation. Factories convert, industries accelerate, oil demand surges. Energy becomes not just a commodity, but a weapon. Within Kikwit's study, maps are spread wide across dark wooden desks. Global oil fields are marked in red pencil. The family's investments, descendants of the old Standard Oil empire, intersect with the machinery of war. Though the original monopoly was dismantled decades earlier, its fragments, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others, remain powerful entities. The mansion feels like a quiet nerve center, its silence deceptive. Nelson Rockefeller, now increasingly influential, moves through the halls with calculated purpose. During the war, he serves as coordinator of inter-American affairs under President Roosevelt, tasked with strengthening ties between the United States and Latin America. The role expands American political and economic influence across the hemisphere. Though his office is in Washington, conversations at Kikwit remain constant. Letters arrive sealed and marked urgent. Private meetings occur in rooms insulated by thick carpets and heavy doors. In the evenings, the estate glows faintly against blackout skies. The war requires energy conservation. Even Kikwit dims its lights more than before. Yet within the library, lamps still burn late into the night. Discussions revolve around post-war reconstruction, global markets, and geopolitical positioning. The family's financial structures are reviewed meticulously. War reshapes borders, borders reshape resources. The emotional tone inside the mansion shifts again. Less defensive now, more anticipatory. As reports of devastation in Europe circulate, philanthropic arms of the Rockefeller family prepare to expand medical and humanitarian efforts. Funding flows toward research institutions and international health programs. The Rockefeller Foundation increases its presence globally. Decisions about where and how to allocate resources are weighed carefully within these walls. Aid becomes influence. Assistance becomes access. Outside, soldiers depart from nearby rail lines. Mothers weep on platforms. The estate's distance from such scenes is physical, but not psychological. The family is aware that its name remains controversial in certain circles. Accusations of corporate entanglements in pre-war Europe linger in public discourse, though no direct criminal wrongdoing is legally established. The tension between private enterprise and public morality continues to hover like unspoken fog within the estate's corridors. After 1945, the war ends, but the world does not settle. Instead, a new division emerges: the Cold War. Ideological lines harden between East and West. Oil once again becomes central to global strategy. The fragments of Standard Oil operate across continents, their pipelines and refineries forming arteries of influence. Inside Kuwait, security increases subtly. The Cold War brings anxiety. Intelligence agencies expand. Surveillance becomes a normalized reality. The estate installs updated communication systems. Meetings become more discreet. Certain rooms are used exclusively for sensitive conversations. Doors close softly but firmly. David Rockefeller, youngest of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s sons, begins to rise in prominence during this period. Educated, internationally minded, he carries himself with understated authority. As he advances within Chase Manhattan Bank, his perspective grows increasingly global. The mansion becomes a backdrop to strategic gatherings that include diplomats, economists, and industrial leaders. Discussions often revolve around emerging markets, oil politics in the Middle East, and the architecture of international finance. The estate's terraces, overlooking the Hudson, host garden receptions during warmer months. Foreign dignitaries walk among sculptures and fountains. Polite laughter drifts across manicured lawns. Yet beneath these social rituals lies calculation. Relationships formed here extend into boardrooms and embassies across the world. Inside, the art collection expands further, modern pieces juxtaposed against classical antiquities. The visual environment reflects ambition not just to possess wealth, but to curate civilization. Culture becomes another form of influence. The mansion is no longer merely a residence, it is a stage where power performs refinement. But the psychological weight intensifies. The 1950s bring prosperity to America, yet they also bring suspicion, McCarthyism, nuclear anxiety, ideological fear. The Hudson Valley occasionally trembles with distant military exercises. Newspapers report on atomic tests. The possibility of annihilation exists as a constant undercurrent. At night, wind moves through the gardens, rustling leaves with a dry whisper. The estate's security patrols continue methodically along the perimeter. The gates remain closed. Isolation deepens, not out of retreat, but preservation. Within family spaces, generational tensions surface quietly. The younger Rockefellers grow up not just with privilege, but expectation. They inhabit bedrooms overlooking endless lawns, yet their futures are already scripted in part. Finance, politics, diplomacy. The weight of surname shapes identity. Private doubts rarely escape the mansion's walls. By the early 1960s, the Cold War intensifies with events like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Inside Kuwait, radios and televisions relay urgent updates. Advisors move quickly. Financial markets react sharply to global brinkmanship. Oil routes and shipping lanes are analyzed again with urgency. The mansion's rooms absorb yet another layer of global anxiety. The estate stands immovable, but the world around it shifts constantly. Stone does not forget. Each era leaves residue: economic collapse, war strategy, philanthropic expansion, geopolitical maneuvering. The psychological architecture of Kikwit becomes heavier with accumulated decisions that shaped millions of lives far beyond its gates. The river below continues its slow passage toward the Atlantic, indifferent yet constant. And above it, the mansion watches, silent, fortified, carrying the burden of empire within its walls. By the late 1960s, the air around Kikwit feels different. The nation outside its gates is no longer unified in quiet deference to institutions of power. Protest movements rise in cities and on university campuses. Demonstrators question war, corporate influence, and economic inequality. The Rockefeller name, once synonymous with industrial triumph, becomes a symbol invoked in chants and pamphlets. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere tightens. Television screens flicker in sitting rooms where heavy drapes filter daylight into muted tones. Images of anti-Vietnam War protests move across the glass. Smoke from distant city streets, captured on broadcast footage, contrasts with the clean, manicured air of the Hudson Valley estate. Yet the psychological distance begins to narrow. Nelson Rockefeller, now a dominant political figure, serves as governor of New York. His ambitions extend toward the presidency. The mansion becomes an informal extension of political space. Strategy sessions unfold beneath chandeliers, campaign advisors speak in deliberate whispers, and maps of electoral districts lie open across polished tables. But political ascent carries turbulence. In 1973, amid national upheaval following the Watergate scandal, Nelson Rockefeller is nominated and later confirmed as Vice President of the United States under President Gerald Ford. The announcement echoes through Kikwit's halls like a culmination of decades of cultivated influence. Yet even this moment of elevation carries strain. Security intensifies. Media attention sharpens. The gates close more frequently. The mansion begins to feel less like a private refuge and more like a fortified symbol. The 1970s also usher in the oil crisis of 1973. Gasoline shortages ripple across America. Lines stretch for blocks outside service stations. Prices surge. Though the original Standard Oil Trust had long since been dismantled, its successor corporations remain integral to global supply chains. Energy becomes the focal point of geopolitical tension. Inside Kikwit's study, discussions return once more to oil fields, Middle Eastern alliances, and financial stability. The air grows heavier during these meetings, less theoretical, more immediate. Economic instability touches everyday Americans in visible ways. The mansion, illuminated at night above the dark river, appears almost otherworldly against headlines describing recession and scarcity. During these years, David Rockefeller's influence expands through his leadership at Chase Manhattan Bank. International relationships deepen. He meets with world leaders across continents. Some of those discussions, formal and informal, are prepared for within the quiet rooms of Kikwit. The estate hosts dignitaries, ambassadors, industrial magnates. Conversations unfold with controlled precision, yet suspicion follows. Critics question the concentration of financial power in private hands. Conspiracy theories begin to circulate, allegations of secret gatherings, shadow diplomacy, hidden agendas. Within the mansion, there is no theatrical plotting in dark chambers, but the perception of secrecy intensifies due to the estate's isolation and discretion. The absence of visibility feeds imagination. The walls absorb it all. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Cold War dissolves, but globalization accelerates. Financial markets integrate across borders. Corporations expand beyond national identities. The Rockefeller name becomes less publicly dominant, but remains structurally influential through foundations, banks, and investments. Kikwit evolves again. Certain wings are preserved meticulously. Others are transitioned gradually toward public accessibility. Portions of the estate are eventually opened for guided tours under the stewardship of historical trusts. Visitors walk through rooms once reserved for private deliberation. Their footsteps echo where titans once spoke in hushed tones. The psychological shift is profound. What was once impenetrable becomes curated. What was once exclusive becomes educational. Yet even as tourists move through galleries and gardens, the air retains its density. The stone walls still hold memory. The terraces still overlook the same river. The silence between rooms feels deliberate. The final decades of the 20th century and the early years of the 21st bring new global anxieties: terrorism, financial crises, political polarization. The Rockefeller family disperses across professions and continents. The centralized dominance of a single industrial empire fades into diversified legacies. But Kaikouet remains. Storms continue to sweep across the Hudson Valley. Autumn leaves gather in corners of marble staircases. The scent of aged wood lingers in the library. Portraits remain fixed in their frames, their expressions unchanged. In 2017, with the passing of David Rockefeller at the age of 101, one of the last towering figures directly linked to the dynasty's formative era is gone. News outlets revisit the family's legacy, its philanthropy, its industrial consolidation, its controversies. The mansion becomes once more a visual anchor for retrospection, yet no dramatic collapse occurs. No hidden chamber is exposed. The shadows associated with the estate are not the product of secret rituals or concealed crimes within its rooms. They are the shadows cast by immense influence, economic, political, cultural. The darkness is structural, not theatrical. Kaikouet stands today as both monument and museum. Its stone facade still reflects morning mist. Its terraces still descend methodically toward the Hudson, but the emotional weight of the place endures. Every corridor carries layered history: monopoly and antitrust, labor unrest and philanthropy, war strategy and global finance, ambition and restraint. The mansion does not speak. It never did. It simply absorbed. It absorbed the calculations that shaped industries. It absorbed the tensions of public backlash. It absorbed generational expectations, private doubts, and national crises. Its silence is not emptiness. It is accumulation. As dusk falls, lights flicker softly behind tall windows. The river below darkens once again, swallowing the reflection of the estate. Wind moves through sculpted gardens, brushing against stone figures that have watched over a century of transformation. The empire of shadows was never hidden beneath the floors. It was built in boardrooms, reinforced by foundations, negotiated across continents, and anchored, always, to this hill above the Hudson. The mansion remains, still,